Welcome, everyone, to the HB Global Employee Ownership Podcast Series. We are continuing our mini-series where Bob Whalen, CEO of HB Global, and Stacy Baum, Senior Vice President of People and Culture, will be focused on what it means to scale culture and how the mission, vision, and core values of HB Global play into that, but also where the rubber meets the road, the behaviors that support that, how being an ESOP supports that, and more. Today specifically, they're going to be focused on introducing the principles of HB Global, why they were put into place, how they create common language throughout the organization, and the flexibility that they help create. We recognize that this podcast is available to the general public, but we just want to say that the views expressed in it are in the context of HB Global and may not apply to broader audiences. With that, Stacy, take it away.
Thanks, Jamie. Hi, Bob.
Good afternoon.
So, on recent podcasts, we've spent some time talking through our mission, vision, and core values and the importance of those with scaling our culture. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that that's really what our mission, vision, and core values are, is a very simple guideline for our employees so that we can scale our culture and so that we can set an expectation of how we're going to behave in our organization. But it also doesn't give a lot of depth, right? So it's a soundbite that you can understand, and I think people clearly, understand when we say trust is one of our core values. What that means. But there's a lot more to the culture of an organization than just a simple soundbite.
Right.
And so that's what we try to accomplish with the principles that we're going to talk about today.
Okay, great. So the goal with the principles is just to provide a little more clarity and set some expectations around behaviors?
I think that's exactly what it is. It's recognizing, again, the mission, vision, core values is relatively simple, that people get 85% of it, right off the top from what's said. The principles are more nuanced and gives you more detail around the actions we should be taking, the behaviors, what is most important to us. I think about the very first principle we have is around safety. And it's the only one of the principles that we put first for a very specific reason, because safety is so important. It is the number one thing. You cannot be a great place to work if you're not safe. And so that's first. But everything else in the principles are just things that are very important to us that are not captured in the mission, vision, and core values that help scale the culture that we want to have. And frankly, gives everybody, a language to use for, what we're trying to accomplish as a business. If there's something that you think isn't right, you can use the principles, as a language to talk to leadership or talk to your supervisor about. So when we talk about the things that you think aren't right about the organization, it gives us all language, to talk about those things.
I think it's pretty exciting. Just to have another tool in our toolbox to scale the culture, to talk about those behaviors that are so critical. I know we've talked before about our belief in autonomy throughout the divisions, but this is also just another example of something we want to provide some clarity around.
Yeah, I think it just gives more detail to every employee of what's important to us, what behaviors we expect, what we're trying to accomplish with our organization. And, I think clarity is always good, but everything can't be in a simple format that we can all memorize and keep. There's got to be some things that are behind the scenes that are more detail oriented. For example, one of the principles is around partnership.
Mm-hmm.
I view every one of our employee owners as a partner in our business. You are my partner. And so everything we do is to align me and what I'm trying to accomplish with the owners of our business, which in our case is our employees. So our employee owners are partners of mine. And so every action that I take is around trying to further the organization for the benefit of our owners. And again, that's just an example of one of the principles that, in coming episodes, we'll break them down and talk about a lot more detail. But I think that gives people an understanding of how I approach this and gives you a language to talk to me about something that you either think is aligned with that or not aligned. Bob, we did this, we took this job on that's 200 miles from the office and our people have to travel and stay overnight. I don't view that as being in line, with being a partner in the business. And we could talk about that and we can decide together whether we can come to an agreement that yes, it is or no, it's not. Or, frankly, sometimes we have 2,000 people. We're not going to agree about everything.
Right.
And, to get back to team is we're doing things that are in the best interest of the whole team. That's not necessarily in the interest of an individual employee in an individual situation. So we at least understand that. Doesn't mean we'll always be happy about it.
Right.
There's things that we do as a business that I'm not always happy about, but I can recognize that they may be the best decision for the company, at the time.
But as a good partner, you make compromises.
I do. And so, I think of some things over time. Stacey, you said, Bob, you cannot do that. And I'm not happy about it, but I recognize that you're right. You're doing it for the best interest of the company as a whole and for our employee owners. And therefore, I bite my tongue and do what I'm supposed to do most of the time.
Most of the time.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. I think the other exciting part about introducing our principles is the flexibility with principles. So, our mission, vision, core values are set to last the test of time. I'm going to talk a little bit about, some flexibility with the principles.
Yes, and I think that that's very true. The intent with our mission, vision, and core values is that they do not change. They could. There could be something that's so important to us as an organization. We feel like we want to incorporate that into our core values, or we want to incorporate it into our mission. But you really, those are not things that you want to be changing all the time. The principles are specifically intended to give us the flexibility to change over time. So if there's a focus that we feel that we need to have that we don't, we want to incorporate that into the principles. We can add it. Or we could take something away, something that we thought was very important, at the time. We don't feel that it raises to the level that we want to incorporate it, into our principles. We can take it out because they're not intended to be memorized. Right. So there are things that are accessible to people. They'll be on our intranet. Our supervisors may have, easy copies that they can use to talk about what we're trying to accomplish from a cultural standpoint, but they are intended to change. And so you will see them change. And in fact, we would love suggestions from anybody in our organization. I think this ought to be a principle. I think it's a standard we ought to have as an organization. We'd love to consider that and to consider incorporating those things into our principles.
Absolutely. I think it's very exciting that we have this foundation for principles starting out. As we acquire more businesses, we're acquiring some new verticals and getting into new businesses. I can't wait to see what the future holds.
Yeah, I think all of these things are tools that we use for new employees that come to any one of our divisions, as well as acquisitions. We feel like forming the culture is something that happens over time. And so they just give us, a deeper toolbox to really talk about things and, what's important to us.
It also helps some of our longtime employees transition with the changes of the business over time.
No question. Because, frankly, we have been an ESOP for 15 years. A lot of our companies have been in existence a lot longer than that. It does take evolution. It does take time. To become, what you are and where we want to be. And so I think it's a tool to really help that evolution happen in a much more, detailed way than just simply, stating our 4 core values.
Well, Bob, I just want to acknowledge, it's an honor to have a CEO that's this committed to scaling our business and our culture in a way that's really people focused. So thank you for that.
It's very important to me. Very early in my career, I had an experience of a company that I worked for that said they were one thing and couldn't have been further from that. And it really made an impact on me to know, when we say what we are, and I think it's important to say all of these things are what we aspire to be. We are not perfect.
Right.
We are not perfect. But I want this organization that when we say this is what we're about, I want us to work really hard to be that. And that goes from everybody in the organization, from me as the CEO and everybody else. We want to aspire to perfectly behave in the way that we do. Of course, we will never achieve that.
Right.
But we can aspire to that. We can work to do that. We can hold ourselves accountable to that. We can use that language to say the things that are not. And I just think it's really important as an organization that we do that. My wife talks about you can pretty much deal with anything if it's consistent.
Right.
And I think this is our way of making consistency in our organization. It gives us a language so that we're always working towards living up to these standards that we set for ourselves.
And it's a sense of comfort with that consistency,
It
which is
certainly
great.
is.
Well, I look forward to diving into further conversations with the principals going forward.
Can't wait.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Be sure to check out Bob's new book, Beyond Your Ownership, being released March 31st, 2026. If you have questions for Bob, we'd love to hear them and answer them in future podcasts. Feel free to submit them to eopodcast@hb-global.com, and we'll see you next time.